Thanks, and hi everyone. I'm Steve Adelman, talking to you from Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm a sports and entertainment lawyer dealing with safety and security at live events, so not a lot of live events for me to work on. So I turned my attention to reopening. And I'm the editor and I guess principal scrivener of the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide, which we wrote back in April and May with 300 of our closest and smartest friends. So that's how I guess I got on this, is the reopening guide.
Lisa, how about you?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Richards Toney, calling in from Washington, D.C. on the unceded lands of the many folks. I am the president and CEO of APAP, also known as the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. We are the largest service organization dedicated to the presenting, touring, and booking industries. And very happy to be here. A lot of the questions we are baffled with, but we are trying to come up with solutions to help and support our members.
Thank you. And Dr. Weiss, how about you? Dr. Weiss, can you hear us? Oh, I think Dr. Weiss might be frozen. Well, we will move on and try to get Dr. Weiss back into the session. Let's talk a little bit about a quick temperature check of the state of the performing arts right now in the United States. Lisa, can we start with you as the CEO of the largest organization for performing arts professionals? Where are we at this moment?
Well, we're definitely at a crisis point. Our industry is suffering. There's no doubt about that. Many people are not working. They don't know when they will be able to work. And it's quite scary. What is encouraging is the resilience that many people are still exhibiting. Just today, I heard about, an organization that I think it's the Kennedy Center, they're actually trying to perform now. They are setting up shop to do some work. That is encouraging. It will be encouraging to see as live events can come back and how in the shape and form that they do and how we will be able to learn from one another as we do it. The live streaming industry, we're all up in that. We're actually at APAP doing a survey right now just to figure out who is actually taking advantage of it and to what end. I think that this hybrid model, right now it's a virtual model. I think that it will become a hybrid model going forward. And so there's so much to learn. So while we are down, if we could also remember to use this time to really learn new skills as best we can, I think that will be very important for our future.
Steve, how about you? What are you hearing?
Very similar. Our industry, I think the line is, we were first to close, we'll be last to reopen. And, some of that has some logic to it. Some of it is infuriatingly illogical. And, I really don't understand, and we've talked about this ourselves, I don't understand why outdoor festivals can't reopen, but I don't know, hay rides for Halloween can. What's the difference?
Indoor haunted houses. Don't forget the indoor haunted houses.
Right, a place where you're supposed to scream, where that's the reasonably foreseeable behavior. I don't get that. So, there's this sort of multi-layered insanity where we've been closed so long and we're struggling to figure out how to reopen on so many fronts. Trying to get some federal funding. Yeah, it's not going so well. Trying to, get the attention of people so that we could actually do small events in places where the environmental conditions allow you to reopen, mostly outside. There are a lot of places that could do that, and yet they're not. And then there are situations, Erica, like yours, where you could reopen. You have the knowledge, you have the skill, you have the courage, but you don't have the regulatory authority. And this, frankly, is making not just me, but quite a few people in our industry really quite agitated.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you speak for me too. Dr. Weiss, I'm so happy that you're back because I was going to try to answer all of the medical,
Medical questions? Well, that would have been fun.
on my own. You know what? It would have been very interesting and I think quite entertaining. We are just asking a quick temperature check of what you're hearing in the performing arts right now. I know
Okay,
you're
so
an
let me-
advisor to several organizations.
Yes, hello everybody, and it's good to be back in this age of Zoom where just as I was about to say hello, I froze and a big error said, you are no longer functioning, and I was like, okay. So here I am again. My name is Dr. Stuart Weiss. I am the owner and medical director for Intelligent Crowd Solutions. We are a company that works very closely with large-scale events and movie productions and television, and we operate across the country. I'm also part of a larger consortium of companies that has formed something called the Entertainment Industry Response, EIR. And through EIR, we're servicing lots of movie productions and live television. We just did, for example, the MTV Music Video Awards and the iHeartRadio Awards, and we have like 25 or 30 productions that we're involved with. So all over the country, mostly in LA, Nashville, and New York. I'm also the owner and operator of a COVID testing center here in New York, in Manhattan, serving the industry and also serving local community. So I sort of caught the tail end of Steve talking about the craziness that's going on now. And I completely agree with that. What I'm seeing is a very cautious approach, which makes little sense in terms of what I'm seeing that's allowed to open, what I'm seeing that's not allowed to open. The problem is there isn't a lot of science to help us guide this. So people are being very cautious. And it's like, why can't you have a gathering here in New York over 50 people outside? There's no science that says if you have enough space in between people, why wouldn't you have 50 or 100 or 200 or 500 people that are outdoors? Now, indoors is a whole different thing. And I'm very cautious about indoors, especially with the recent articles that have come out talking about aerosol particles playing a really important role. And you saw the CDC put that guidance up for 5 minutes and then take it down for political reasons. But the science has been showing that aerosol plays a part for several months. We've been all saying that. So it's a little crazy right now. I'm sure we're going to get into crystal ball reading later. I have my crystal ball warmed up, so we can sort of try and predict what's going to happen months from now. But there's this very slow and jerky kind of reopening happening now as people are trying to figure out how to do this.
Thank you. Now I'm going to dive into some questions if you all don't mind. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. As a leader of the largest arts professional organization in the United States for performing arts professionals, when we're talking about venues reopening, what sort of thoughts are you seeing from the industry in general in terms of addressing both the COVID safety guidelines and the huge social change in regards to Black Lives Matter that's currently occurring? Would you say that the industry is thinking about these two items separately or as one issue?
That's a great question. And it's often put, we discuss this a lot. And where I am seeing a real push for is that they are not separate anymore. They're not separate. And it's refreshing. For the venues, our work, the industry as a whole, to be safe, we must be safe in the COVID sense, and we must be safe as anti-racist. And so to do both things, I mean, you know, I guess it started earlier than that, but when I started at APAP July 1, and as a consultant previous to that, June 1, that was my first, I mean, I started June 1. It was like, what are we going to do? Are we going to put a statement out about George Floyd? And I said, yes, we will. And so the safety piece of your personal health and that of your well-being and that of your invitation and that of your ability to feel included and that of equity, it's all tied up into what we're calling, I mean, we have so many working groups at APAP because we're trying to really understand what's happening and to, be the best advice to the field. We have a working group called the Reopening Working Group. We have another one called, My goodness, it's been a long day.
It's
Um,
okay. It's okay.
I'm trying to think, equitable force majeure.
Mm,
And that's a big one, you know, because force majeure, I mean, these clauses that our industry and all of us, you know, have to succumb to at the end of the day, the human element to this is what can we really do? And what do we really need to speak up on behalf of? How do we really need to protect our people? Because when you look at, are the artists protected? Are they going to be protected when we reopen? You know, we're looking at the audience, but what about the crew? You know,
Yep.
what about the artists? You know, everybody. And
Yep.
so while this is a very, you know, it's a treacherous time, it's the righteous call to action that the field needs. And not just the performing arts, but many. You know, we are all asking hard questions now, and people are actually courageous enough to give out the true answers, real answers. So we have these working groups and we're getting the, you know, the people's thoughts and everything. And I'm really excited about what we can deliver to our public at the time when the time is right.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Stu, I'm now going to fire several questions at you, kind of John McLaughlin style, right?
Okay,
And then if I
I'm
don't
going to
get
get
your
myself.
answer, I'm going to shout out wrong, okay?
Okay. All right. I'm all set. I'm ready for you.
Okay, so let's talk about transmission of let's pivot to COVID-19. Where are we on what we know about how the virus is transmitted? That's obviously been a little bit of a hot topic this last week, which really, in my personal opinion, it's science, but what do we know? What are the facts?
Right. So we've learned a lot about the virus as we've gone forward over the past 9 months, more or less. So this is what we know right now. The virus is definitely a respiratory virus, right? We first were worried about contact and touching it. Remember back in March and April, we were all washing our groceries and scrubbing our fruit and all that stuff, right? But it's really turned into a respiratory illness. And so respiratory illnesses are spread by respiratory particles, by droplets. Now, there are two types of droplets that we're seeing. And in the early parts of the illness, we were talking a lot about the larger droplets that spread about 6 feet. And that's why the 6-foot rule is in place. These are larger droplets that come out of our mouth when we're talking, when we're breathing, when we're talking, when we're shouting, when we're singing. And that's the different levels. You know, breathing puts out a little bit of droplets, talking puts out more, singing and shouting put out much more. Playing instruments, wind instruments and brass instruments put out lots and lots of particles. These larger particles settle down out of the air within about 6 feet. What the recent evidence has started to show is that we also have to worry about little teeny particles called aerosol particles. And these particles do not settle out, and they can float around in the air for hours, and they can float for much more than 6 feet, 20, 30, 40 feet. There's a good study looking at a poorly ventilated restaurant in China, and also a good study about a choir practice back in March and April here in the United States, and several other really good studies showing that aerosol particles play an important role in the spread of this illness. So our knowledge has moved forward as we've learned more and more about the illness. And that's why indoor venues are particularly challenging right now, because with aerosol particles floating around, if you don't have a really good ventilation system, you will have the capability or the possibility of spreading this virus around through a fairly big indoor space.
And that's why a lot of these venues have become an even bigger worry. Is that right?
Yeah, indoor. Again,
Yeah,
outdoor is very different. These particles float up into the atmosphere and they're light and they float up out into the atmosphere and the wind carries them away and the ultraviolet sunlight degrades them and they evaporate and eventually they just go away. The indoor venues where you don't have that, where there's circulating ventilation systems, that's where the problem is.
And I've personally never been in a theater that has windows that can open. I've never seen one designed that way. I think that on Shakespeare's day they were doing something right by not having a total roof over the globe.
Now, there are mitigation strategies you
Yeah.
can use for lack of windows, right? And
Right.
and there's filtration mitigation strategies. There is ultraviolet light mitigation strategies. There are also air exchanges. Like, for example, in our COVID testing center, we installed a ventilation system that does 5 air exchanges per hour, so that whole volume of air that is changed. That's a little bit less than an isolation room in an ICU, but in that, all those particles are carried outside the space. Plus, we put something called MERV-16 HEPA filtration. So we capture any particles that are in the air, we capture them in the filters, and then we exchange the air 5 times. Sort of expensive, but I wanted to do that to make my COVID testing center a safe space. So there's different levels of mitigation that theaters and indoor venues can do.
We'll get into what they should be doing right now in a second. But can you clarify who is catching COVID?
Yes. So the spectrum of ages are pretty much everybody can catch COVID. What we're seeing is the people that are higher risk to get ill and to get serious illness are the people that are older and have underlying medical conditions. But remember that almost half of the people that are walking around with COVID now don't have symptoms, because the younger people, they're asymptomatic and they're contributing significantly to the ongoing spread of this illness. And the problem is that they spread it amongst themselves, and then eventually it goes home to a vulnerable population of older people, multi-generational families, or it goes to populations of people that have underlying medical conditions, people at home that have asthma or respiratory problems or heart disease, and that's where you get into trouble. And that's what I'm very worried for example, with schools, with restarting colleges and universities. When those kids go home for Thanksgiving, they're going to bring all the COVID with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Where would you say that we are on treatments at the moment?
So there's been some really great progression of treatment, and we've learned a lot about the disease as we move forward, right? So the death rate has definitely come down. We understand the phases of illness better now. We don't have a full understanding of the disease yet, but we understand a lot more about how to treat people now. We still don't have great treatments. We've got something called remdesivir, which is an antiviral that helps at certain phases of treatment. We have certain immune system suppression called steroids, which helps a lot. There's a new thing you read about called Convalescent Serum, which is really good. You take somebody who's gotten better from COVID, gives a blood donation, and we pull out of their blood the very active antibodies, and we give it to really sick people that are on the verge of dying, and it really turns them around. So convalescent serum is a really good strategy for very, very sick people in the hospital. So those people that have recovered from COVID, if you can give a pint of blood, that'd be great. There are serum collection places all around the country. So, the treatments have gotten better. We still don't have a great treatment for COVID, but we're learning a lot more, and we're intervening in the hospitals where we know a lot more about how to take care of people.
We're going to move on to vaccines in a second, but I want to ask you about testing, because you know so much about testing. And today, of course, United Airlines announced testing for passengers starting off on their San Francisco to Hawaii flights for $250, a rapid test. Where are we on testing right now? And can you tell us a little bit more about the test that was just approved and any other rapid tests that are in the pipeline?
Yes. So there are several new technologies coming out. So let's talk a little bit about testing. There's 2 parts to testing that people need to understand. There's the collection of the sample side of this, and then there's the processing of the sample side of it, right? So collecting of the sample, there's several different ways of getting a virus sample from your body. The first one was what's called nasal pharyngeal. And that's, if any of you have ever had this, it's the one where they stick the probe in your nose and they keep going until it feels like it's in your brain, right?
Yeah.
What they're actually doing is they're going from the anterior side of your nose right here, all the way back to your throat. So it's a fairly long probe. It was initially the best way to get virus. So that's nasopharyngeal. Now, a lot of the tests can do anterior nasal, which is just about this far into your nose, right? About an inch, inch and a half, right to the little bumps, what are called turbinates in the front of your nose, right? And then the third thing that we're actually looking at right now is saliva testing. There's been a couple of number of saliva tests that have been approved recently because you can detect virus from getting a good saliva sample. So that's the collection side. And we'll talk about emerging new technologies in a second. But then there's the processing side. So there's several different levels of tests that are out there. The most sensitive test, the one that picks up the most amount of virus, is something called PCR, polymerase chain reaction. There's several types of PCR. The most common is something called RT-PCR, but then there's LAMP PCR and a couple other ones as well. The PCR picks up pretty much any amount of virus in your body, but that's a good thing, but it's also a challenge because it will pick up 3 dead viruses that happen to be hanging around in your nose. So there are some people that continue to test positive for weeks or months after they get over the virus. And there's no way of knowing. The machine picks up the presence of virus. It does not differentiate between live virus and dead virus. So you've got the top level test is PCR. One level down is called molecular nucleic acid amplification, which is called a NAT test, N-A-A-T. That's made by Abbott, and the brand is ID Now. There's a couple other companies that are coming out with NAT tests as well. Little lower sensitivity, so it picks up mid-90s, where the PCR picks up about 99% of the positive cases. The NAT test picks up probably, the isothermal NATs pick up around mid-90s, 95, 96% of the tests that are positive. One step down are called the antigen tests. Those tests pick up not the inside working of the virus, but it picks up one of the proteins on the outside. It's called the antigen test. It actually is looking for virus, but the sensitivity is a little bit lower than the PCR, lower than the NAT, the isothermal NAT, and then it's the lowest of the rapid tests. It's called the antigen test, made by a couple different manufacturers. The most common one is called the Quidel Sofia 2 antigen test. The new test that you read about is something called a lateral flow assay. And that test has a much lower sensitivity. It's only in the mid 80s, but it's made to do population screening. So it's made, you can have a lower sensitivity, you can have a lower accuracy, but if you're doing it very often, it doesn't matter if you miss somebody on the first day, but you pick them up on the second time you do the test. So those tests, which are very cheap, Abbott talked about them being around $15. The other lateral flow assays will come out between $3 and $5, but they're meant to be used several times a week to screen large populations.
And no, sorry, go on.
So the last part is, what are the emerging technologies? What are we seeing that are going to come out soon? The most exciting one is a breathalyzer type test. It's being developed by a company in Israel right now. There's also a company here in the US that's working on it. Right now, they're not ready for deployment. Their sensitivities are a little too low to make them useful, but the technology it's called nanotechnology. That technology is being developed, and I really think that eventually that technology will be out there. You'll be able to blow into this thing, and we'll see that you have COVID right away. So lots of technologies are emerging. The testing scenery is actually the testing landscape is changing very often as we move forward.
And how are you seeing that affect the performing arts?
So initially, a lot of performing arts were requiring RT-PCR, which has a 2 to 3 day turnaround. So it makes it kind of hard to do testing of people as they come to work. Some unions are now accepting not only RT-PCR, but the NAT test, the Abbott ID Now. A multi-union paper just came out yesterday, some guidance that talked about not accepting the antigen tests. So it's evolving right now. We're seeing this landscape develop right in front of our eyes right now.
And Lisa, what are you seeing in terms of the performing arts with discussions about the rapid tests? Are there discussions with Broadway theaters, with other commercial theaters, and then any discussions in the not-for-profit sector with rapid tests?
I actually don't know precisely
Mhm.
on that. I have not been a part of those discussions. Some people who are participating in groups who are participating in our working groups may have that. And I suspect after our conference, we're going to have quite a big discussion on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to just learning where people are with that.
Yeah. What about you, Steve? Are you hearing in terms of large scale events that you work with, any sort of rapid testing in order to get these shows back on the road?
No. I
No.
mean, that's the direct answer. What we're seeing is that the largest events that are going right now with fans are NFL games, and rapid testing seems not to be part of that equation at all.
No.
The biggest capacity stadium with the most people was Cowboys Stadium. Not surprisingly, in Texas, where their rate of infection is roughly twice that of the next worst state, which is California. But everything's bigger in Texas, so testing, yeah, not really on their radar. Just let them in and let's see what happens. I find that mystifying, but frankly, I find it it is equally mystifying to me that today's news included that the Metropolitan Opera, they're not planning to reopen for the foreseeable future either. And
Mhm.
I don't get that,
Yeah.
because there are ways that they could perform outdoors. They have the space and they're in an area that's doing well. And so they're not availing themselves of opportunities that, in the NFL, they're just like, oh yeah, let's do it. By contrast, the Met is being so conservative that I think that they're missing an opportunity that they could seize. So really, it's all over the place.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this, about reopening prior to a vaccine. I mean, as you all know, New York State has 4 phases, and the performing arts are the part of phase 4 that is not allowed to reopen. And there's been no hint of any sort of reopening date from the state for outdoor or indoor performing arts. Lisa, what are you hearing from other parts of the country in terms of who is reopening and where and how?
I don't know.
Yeah.
We're not opening. We are not opening. We're not open. The live events, as I know them, I just found out today, as I said in my first remark, and I don't want to speak on this, but I understand that the Kennedy Center has figured out a way to do something, I think, as soon as October, or they're selling tickets for an event. And I'm curious about that, and as to how they're going to do it. I need to look very closely at that. But, from what I hear, we are not reopening. We're looking at ways to try to survive
Yeah.
in the virtual realm, and then looking at what begets the future, which is 2022 and
Yeah.
23, with some expectation that we will always be in a hybrid reality.
Right.
So we're working on our advocacy right now, which is collective advocacy as it needs to be. It's about the whole ecosystem of the performing arts, the not-for-profits, the agents, the managers, everybody, the presenters who are in rural communities, urban communities, everybody. Yeah, it's a decimated time.
Yeah, it sure is. And yet there seems to be quite a few people who assume that there will be a reopening in January. In quite a few theaters, Broadway, of course, saying that they're planning to reopen in January. What do you think about that, Lisa? Do you think that that is something that's actually going to occur, or do you think that will be a deadline that winds up being pushed off?
Well, I always am, I'm always optimistic. I
Yeah.
want our people to work. Arts
Right.
workers are essential. We,
Yep.
I think we learned that, looking at a lot of the advocacy that happened early on about gig workers and just how large we contribute, how large of a population we have within the whole creative economy. And when you look at the New York and New York City and Broadway, absolutely I want them to reopen.
Yeah.
It has to happen. However, it has to be safe. New York will have to allow it. You can't do a live event in New York right now. When that would be lifted, I don't know. I'm watching it daily. It
Mhm.
matters to us very much.
Yeah.
But, you know, I can't play, I'm definitely not Dr. Weiss, right? My job is to provide the information and to, at this point, find a way to help our field come together,
Mm.
because the solutions that we will have during this liminal phase that we're in, this interim period,
Yeah.
they will matter so much as to how well we are able to do once we are back open. You know, that's sometimes a hard thing to say and hear, because people say, but I'm hurting. And what I say is, I know you're hurting. I want you to hurt. Yes, I understand that, but I want you to also find the space that to know that this is figure outable on some level, and to plan. Because so much of what we're learning is that we have structures within our system. When we look at how reliant and how vulnerable we are. I mean, even my organization, how vulnerable it is. We have a conference that we hold every year in New York City. It's the largest piece of what we do. It's a very vulnerable business model. A lot of our business models are that. But we have to, at this time, look and see how can we look ahead, so that if we were to have to come to such a situation in the future, how would we do things differently? What can we learn from our whole industry about other ways of operating? And that's what I have to focus on, so that
Yeah.
I can keep people's spirits up and
Mhm.
keep them in a space where they can still feel pride and hope to do what it is that they do, and to do that well.
That's so wise, and segues right into my question for Steve. Really, what are you recommending that performing arts venues do? What are you recommending that performing arts venues and performing arts organizations do in terms of some reopening? Is it all outdoor work? Is it outdoor work with small crowds? What can they do to kind of keep their spirits up and keep themselves ticking over to some extent?
Well, so long as we're talking about keeping spirits up and not talking about making money and having a positive cash flow, I can answer that question.
Okay.
So
Well, we want the other two, Steve.
I know,
All
but
the answers, please.
right, take it up with your elected officials, people, because that's where the logjam is as far as cash flow. But as far as keeping spirits up and remaining relevant and top of mind for people in the community, yeah, it's outdoors. And I'm in Arizona right now. We're still over 100 degrees, so we're looking forward to moving outdoors. But literally, the first event that I went to after COVID hit the US was a drive-in EDM festival here in the Phoenix area. It was 111 degrees. It was full. The reason it was full is people were desperate to get out of their homes. And that's a saving grace for us. So, the concept of us being essential workers, hell yeah, we are. Find me anyone who's not absolutely out of their mind with being stir crazy. We're not essential workers in the way Dr. Weiss is, but providing entertainment, providing a sense of community, social interaction, yeah, that is a part of our humanity that we can't easily give up, nor should we. So, Erica, the question you asked is outdoors? Yes, outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Outdoors when it's hot? Yes, outdoors when it's hot. In the Northeast, outdoors when it's cold? Yeah, you can bundle up. I used to live in New York. I know that people have sweaters and coats. So do it outdoors? Sure. Right now, while there's still grass, paint white circles on the lawn and have that social distancing enforced that way. When there's snow, just shovel around the snow. There are ways to do this. This is not a Rubik's Cube. So what are we advising people to do? Do the 3 damn things that everyone knows that you're supposed to do. Social distancing, face covering, hand washing. Do them, and to the maximum extent that you can do those things consistent with your artistic model, get on with it. Do something, because this pandemic is not going to end like that. It's not going to end when the first vaccine comes out, whenever that is, not next month, I predict, but it's gonna be a long haul. Waiting for, salvation to come from on high is a bad strategy. So we're advising people, the Event Safety Alliance, do the things that we have known for months that everyone has to do. Social distancing, face covering, hand washing. Be smart about that. Enforce it so that we don't have a chain smokers, Sturgis, Tulsa, super spreader nonsense, because we're smarter than that. We're not better than that. To be sure, Americans have consistently failed, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying. We can be smart. It requires enforcement. And that, I do think, is within our ability.
Right.
So outdoors, yeah. Now, yeah. Not huge, not economically viable, but possible, yeah.
And that segues so evenly into this question about vaccines, Dr. Stu. Where are we right now with the vaccines? And can you also speak to, I think there's this issue that people are thinking that the vaccine is going to be some sort of savior, and it's going to be like the measles vaccine or a smallpox vaccine, and boom, we're all set. Can you speak to, after we do get this vaccine, which we will get a vaccine, but it's not going to be 100% effective. I hope I didn't just ruin anyone's day by saying that. But, we're going to be in this period of vaccine plus public health measures, I would think.
Yes, absolutely, Erica. That's a really good point. So there are some really good vaccine candidates that are out there. There's several of them now that have entered what's called phase 3 trials, which is the phase of vaccine trials where you actually have large groups of people where it's being tested. Now, we still don't know whether the vaccines are going to be effective and safe on a large scale basis, which is why you must wait until the phase 3 trials are completed and the data is analyzed. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell you that if a vaccine is approved before November, I would not take it. Because the phase 3 trials will not be done until the end of the year. We already saw that AstraZeneca had to stop one of their trials because they had an adverse outcome. It was the second time they stopped their trial. It's a small adverse outcome, but those are the kind of things that you find in the large scale trials, which is why it's so important. There are some really good candidates. Some of the candidates require 2 vaccines. Some of them, Johnson & Johnson, for example, only requires 1 vaccine to be effective, or at least we think so in the laboratory. Even when we get a vaccine, we don't know what percentage of people will be protected. No vaccine is 100%. We're hoping that it's in the high 60s, low 70s. But even then, we don't know exactly how effective the vaccine, and we don't know how many Americans will actually take the vaccine, right? Some people think that 40, 50% may actually choose not to get the vaccine. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about vaccine. And the last thing is the distribution and administration of vaccines. So I personally don't think we're going to have vaccine out there with a good number of people vaccinated until at least next summer or next fall. Anybody that thinks beforehand, I think is not taking in all the factors that need to come into play. So that's where we are at vaccines.
Well, and I think so many people are not realizing that the only vaccine right now that's in phase 3 that has only 1 shot, as you said, is the Johnson & Johnson. All the rest require a booster shot, and that's like a logistics nightmare.
Yeah, it's hard. And also most of them require sub-zero storage temperatures.
Right.
which makes cold chain, which makes shipping the virus around and storing it really difficult, because it gets to be, it's not only freezer temperature, it's sub-zero. It's temperatures that the normal refrigerators in doctors' offices can't get to. So how do you actually have a supply chain that allows you to send the vaccine out without it all getting destroyed? So there's lots of issues that are involved right now with how we, once you even have a vaccine, how are we going to distribute it safely and how are we going to administer it? So lots of issues to come.
And what do you think about other public health measures that will have to go into effect after we have the vaccine? I mean, are we still going to be distancing to an effect? Will people still be wearing masks in theaters?
Yeah, it's Steve's passionate 3 things you got to do, right? It's going to be hand washing and face covering and social distancing. Those are the things that will keep us safe. Those are tried and true public health initiatives. Those are things that work. And we're going to have to keep doing that long after we have a vaccine. It may be that this virus stays with us like flu, that it's there forever, that we have this in the population and it just, we get that eventually you get treatments and we have vaccines and we lower the spread rate, but we have a long way to go before we can say we've conquered this virus. And that doesn't include the possibility of an RNA virus mutating and changing itself. We're not even talking about that. Right now, the virus seems to be fairly stable. It mutates, but not as much as influenza, for example, but it's definitely mutating.
Yeah, and when you let it get out of control, you have so many opportunities for it to mutate all over the place in all different ways. So we're going to be moving on to our questions section soon from the audience. So if you want to put some questions in the Q&A, we're going to get to those in the last 20 minutes, 15 minutes of this Fringe Talk. But before we do get to those, Steve, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, and I know that there's no way you can answer this in 2 minutes, so you're going to have to speak very quickly. But what do we do for so many of us? We need event insurance, and we're hearing stories of just event insurers dropping organizations without warning. What's going to happen with liability? What's going to happen with event insurance? Even if we're able to reopen, will any of us ever be able to afford event insurance again, basically?
Okay, I have good news and I have bad news. Which do you want first?
Oh, I don't know. You choose.
All right, I'm gonna start with the good news because wow, good. Dr. Weiss, you really brought me down with some of that stuff, and I knew what you were gonna say, and it's still really hard to hear.
Sorry, Steve.
No, I mean the truth hurts, but you know, I guess I'm a grown-up. I'll face it. All right, good news. So the lawyer is going to tell you some happy news about liability.
Lawyers will not do that.
I'm sorry?
Lawyers are going to do that? Normally,
I know.
Happy news from a lawyer.
I am so out of character right now. So the doctor is scaring us and the lawyer is telling us happy things. You know, the work clearly dogs are lying with cats and, you know, everything is topsy-turvy. So the good news from a liability standpoint is there's not going to be a tidal wave of litigation arising from people getting sick from COVID-19 and then saying, I'm going to sue, you know, the venue that got me sick. That hasn't happened so far. It's not going to happen. Here's why. To teach you a little tort law, this will be fast. There are 4 elements to a tort. They are duty, breach, causation, and harm. Focus on causation. Full name of that is proximate cause. That means, unlike all the other places that somebody has gone, you know, whether it's a pharmacy, a supermarket, their friend's house, hanging out over the back fence, wherever, lots of other places, every place else will have been reopened by the time we can go out and play at an entertainment event. So proving the element of proximate cause will be virtually impossible for anyone who says, I sustained COVID-19 and I got sick and suffered because I went to your event. They're not going to be able to prove that. So the good news, liability, not a problem. There are other bumps in the road, but really that's the one that just overwhelms every other piece of legal news, and it's all good.
Steve, can I ask you a question real fast? What happens if we do contact tracing and we trace a large cluster back to one venue?
Well, there's your Sturgis scenario, isn't it? And that's fun. But even with Sturgis, you know, literally several 100,000 people, really easy to follow because they're riding giant noisy hogs and they've got amazing tats and leathers. But even they can't establish proximate cause because they stopped at the Quick Mart to fill up on diet soda on the way in, on the way out. They stayed at a crappy motel. Yes, of course they were drinking at the Satisfied Frog every afternoon for 7 days in Sturgis. And maybe they did contract the disease there, but maybe they got it by, I don't know, drinking out of someone else's beer in the parking lot. And so there's no way to establish by a preponderance of the evidence, 51%, that unlike every other experience they had, the only experience that caused them to get sick was this one, the one involving live entertainment. So I think that is great news because it's one huge thing we don't have to worry about. Period. New paragraph. Alas, it is not all, rainbows and unicorns because insurance. Yeah, the insurance situation sucks. You won't be able to buy, infectious disease coverage for the foreseeable future, however long it takes to have a vaccine, get into enough people that there's herd immunity. That's going to be a drop in the bucket compared to the wait until you can buy infectious disease coverage again. It's just not for sale. The Lloyd's of London syndicate, they're crazy. They'll insure anything. You can't buy insurance from them for infectious disease coverage. It's a pandemic. They'd lose money on that, and they're not stupid. So there is still business interruption coverage that you can buy, but just like the business interruption coverage that we saw back in March and April, not providing coverage for COVID-19 related closures, yeah, I mean, really the situation hasn't gotten worse. It's just that now you can't pay a premium to buy coverage that still won't help.
Right.
Maybe that's even a silver lining.
So
I'm reaching here.
Yeah. You're trying. Let's move on to one of the questions that we have. And Lisa, I'm gonna ask you this: what can organizations do to best market their events during this time to comfort without overwhelming their patrons?
That's a very good question. There's so many things people are doing. Some of the things that I'm seeing that I think are interesting and that are, I hope, successful, and only time will tell. First of all, visibility is key. It's key. Good art, well marketed. I mean, everything that we've always done, it's always been about how we've marketed it, how the consumer has experienced it, and that has informed success. So we double down with that. We don't have the opportunity to do things the way we traditionally do them, so we get creative. As I said earlier, we at APAP we're in the process of a survey to see how folks are utilizing the live streaming option. But that's a very important option, and for many people, it's working. And if you've not tried it, you should try it. It's nothing, and that's the other thing. Perfection, the good up. The phrase.
Yeah.
Just give it a try. Nobody's looking at you to be perfect. No one expects, the best thing you can do is try it and see if it matches with your community, the community that you serve. Do they appreciate it? I think about the content of the programming that we've put on. You've cultivated an audience for a reason. What are they interested in? Speak to them. Are they interested in meeting the actors? Ask them. Are they interested in having more conversations with the design team? Ask them. What about the writers? Put people in front of them that they rarely get an opportunity to interact with, because in a traditional exchange, it would be the show and the audience, and that's it. And maybe if it's opening night, maybe, if you paid enough, right, get that ticket to meet others. But this is an opportunity to triple your access. You've got your loyal people, and then you've got a whole world of people who may not know who you are or what you do. And so it's really an incredible opportunity for marketing. And it's a competitive world. You know, it has its own milieu. I mean, this virtual platform, I mean, the number of people who reached out to APAC, I can do this for you. I can, that's, well, what should I choose? If you've got some money, you know, it does cost. But luckily, there are a lot of free things that we can do because, you know, we're in the Zoom era. We've got breakout rooms. You can have conversations. The most important thing is people need engagement. You know, generally when you thought, you know, everybody was out on a Friday or Saturday night, you'd be surprised. They're not. So reaching out and taking a chance and seeing what your numbers are like and not being afraid of, you know, there were small numbers, but you know what? Maybe next time you'll double that. So it's really about looking at your community, the people you're serving, the people you want to serve, and being very thoughtful about what they need at this time and speaking very plainly to them in that way.
Yeah, and it's counting numbers in a different way too, because you have entire families or groups of people who live together watching you know, your live stream performances together. So you can't, it's a little bit like comparing apples to oranges. At least that's what we have seen. Okay, another question. Oh my goodness, they're coming in now. Dr. Stu, this one's for you. Can you outline some safe ways to engage young people in the artistic process? Can you talk about rehearsals? I know that you've talked about safe ways to rehearse, how you can safely produce work for school communities.
Right. So that's a great question. And thanks whoever asked that. So one of the key things to engage young people in the arts, again, is to try and do it outside. So if you're in an environment where you can hold classes or hold engagement rehearsals outside, that's the best strategy. And we have actually advised several performing arts groups to do the rehearsals outside. Now, I understand it's hard to block and it's hard to do. There comes a point when you have to be inside. And then there are strategies for how do you bring in small amounts of actors and put them on stage, and how do you do that? But the big rehearsals and the big engagements, especially if there's loud projecting of voices or there's singing, that needs to be outside. It's definitely possible. And it's definitely possible to engage young people in arts. And I'm all for that. You know, kids trying to learn from home, there's definitely negative sides to doing at-home schooling. And if there's a way to engage them in arts and entertainment, that's really important.
Thank you so much. Okay, another question. This one's for Steve and Lisa. What interesting work have you seen out in the field? Someone said, like Steve mentioned, drive-ins.
The stuff that I've seen that has worked, drive-ins, painted circles on the grass, the photos that circulated about a month ago of Newcastle, England, where they were on raised platforms with railings around them. Beautiful. I mean, that's fantastic stuff because it enforces social distancing. The whole problem with social distancing is people don't want to do it. So if they're in some kind of enclosure, even if it's literally paint on the ground, seems to work. That's what I've seen, and I like it.
Lisa, how about you? Immersive work? I've seen some of that going on outside.
Yeah, I've seen some of that. I haven't really seen the outcomes of it. Like I'm not sure how people are experiencing it enough to say that they'd want to, you know, that it's something to really repeat. And you know, as you get seasonal, I mean, I'm in a season where, you know, I've got on long sleeves now. I'm definitely not in Arizona. It's getting a little cool out here. You know, that is a thing. But you know, I've seen just really a lot of collaborative virtual work, you know, artists working together, pairing up, you know, artists that you may not otherwise, because people just have the time. And so it's actually quite pedestrian, and I love it. You know, it's not proscenium stage work. It's, you know, you got a chance to see Patti LaBelle with, who was it, right? Yes, my mind is late, but you know, that's just an example. You know, the singers, you know, they're pairing up together. They're doing these really creative things. to just speak to people where they are so that it's not pressure filled. You know, you can just come as you are. You don't have to be dressed up. You don't have, you know, you just come as you are. And that's what I mean when I say the accessibility. So I very much like that. And I know that a lot of, you know, they're offering classes. You know, it's a great time for education. People, they need to learn the craft. They need to understand that this craft is a craft. You can't just up and do it. There are years and years, decades that people invest to make themselves do what it is you think is so fabulous. So there's that lane in terms of education. And someone asked a question about young people. I mean, there's so many classes and many of them are free or low cost. A lot of the studios, theaters, you know, the arts education programs are offering these things. And I think it's remarkable. And you can be anywhere you want. Dance Theater Harlem is offering, you know, kids classes. You can be in Arizona and take a class with Dance Theater Harlem. Your daughter, your son can take a ballet class with Dance Theater of Harlem in Arizona. You know, this is the opportunity we have within the virtual realm. And that's why I'm, you know, I know the outside and I'm glad to hear it because I'm going to think about that, you know, Steve, very, very much. So I'm going to try to figure out how we can figure out how to do more of that. But we should talk. I like the accessibility. You know, the arts for many years in some circles, not all the arts, but some elitist, you know, who's invited in, who feels comfortable at the theater, how much was a ticket? How much did you have to donate to get this ticket, you know, to be a part of such an event? This time, as painful as it is, it allows for greater access. It allows for our doors to be wide open. And I think that we will be better. If anything, it will be from that.
And do you think that there will be a permanent change after this based on that? I mean, there's been some concerns raised that, you know, once performing arts centers and theaters can reopen, that they'll have to mount work that is so incredibly commercial and surefire hits because they are in such bad shape financially. Are you worried that some of that is going to be lost, some of that open access?
Well, you know, I think every organization, company, manager has to look at his or her business model and what they're trying to achieve. All of these things are possible. And someone raised also a question about, you know, what was the next question? It relates to this. If, you know, do we lose something in looking at this business model? Of course, you know, you gain and you lose. But that's the cycle of things, you know. I don't think things will ever go back to 100% the way they were. However, like if we can take this time now and figure out how to fill that void, the void that we were not able to fulfill because of where we are, and supplement it with something that we've learned in this environment, it's where we will be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's where the success will be.
We are running out of time here, and we have so many good questions coming in. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. Lisa, I'm going to ask you another tough question. Funding. You know, we in the United States Association of Fringe Festivals wound up getting very depressed when we were on calls with those fringe leaders from other countries, because there's about, as you know, about 250 fringe festivals worldwide. And we would talk to people from other countries, and they say, well, you know, at least the government sees the worth in performing arts festivals and is propping us up. And we would then all hang up the phone or click off, you know, sign off Zoom and say, oh my God, where are we? Are you hearing of any funding that might be coming for the arts?
Well, there's so much happening right now. I can't recall specifically what it is, but, you know, like the particular opportunity, but it is coming. I mean, the advocacy right now is, I think, stronger than it's ever been. I mean, I myself participate in at least 3 groups a week, and, you know, where you're getting intel on what's happening on the Hill and how things are looking. So yes, I do believe it's coming. The key will be the consistency to which we advocate in the big case statement that we make. I feel personally that, you know, we have been sitting in really comfortable seats in our field, and our industry has advocated in a compartmentalized framework. If we can change that, we're always on the bottom of the national totem pole. We know that, okay? But I'm tired of that. I love having this conversation with Dr. Weiss. This is what I want to talk about, because I want us to be able to take that information and what we know as our need and create our justification as to why this industry matters and why it is essential. But we've got to open up these conversations, get outside of our field, have Dr. Weiss and all his colleagues at our table, and that's happening on all of these working groups, the reopening, we're finally talking to others. And we're also finally talking to, like, let's say the nonprofits, we're talking to the managers and the agents, because it's an ecosystem. If the managers aren't working, the artists aren't working, then the organizations who are producing or presenting the work, they're not, because who's going to find it? I mean, where's the relationship? So it's a whole ecosystem. And we all have separate business models. Yeah, right? Nonprofits, we know how they work, and for-profits, yes. But right now, no one's working. And so we've got to understand the arts worker and call up all of us up under that and make a big case. And what is our real contribution dollar-wise to a city like Washington, D.C.? When I was at the Arts Commission, that's what we spent our time figuring out. What is our real contribution to New York City? Where are you? In Tempe? Where are you, Steve?
Me? Scottsdale.
Yeah, Scottsdale. What is our real contribution to that city? And speak from those frames. Make our case statements bigger. That's where we push, and we begin to see the release of funds. I've seen it happen because I worked for the city, and I watched the budget of a local arts agency double itself under my leadership and my predecessors. And I know that it can happen, but it's a larger case statement. It's not art for art's sake. It's art as a conduit too, and you fill in all the blanks. And right now, as we're in this opportunity to have our voices heard, we're in an election season. The arts are essential to that. We are part of the public space. The venues that aren't open, please, anybody listening, go call and find out if you can be a polling place, a voting poll place. I mean, make our work essential, make it matter. We may not be able to talk about what we typically talk about, but get your community riled up about that. That's how I say, oh, well, what is the venue? That's publicity. Oh, well, who is that? What is that? Who's the director? What we typically do, we're so glad to serve you today and forevermore, because we will always be here. We are part of this civic life. And so, it's a long range plan. There are no short, quick answers. There will be some short, quick successes, and that's
a question that I know Steve is really, really looking forward to having asked of him. I'm going to start with you. I'm going to start with you because you're so keen on this question, and then I'll go to Lisa, and then final word, Dr. Weiss. Steve, what are you hearing? What do you think? Crystal ball. Where do you think we'll be in a year's time? Where do you think you'll be by the end of next year?
You may as well ask my stinking bobblehead, because he knows as much about the future as I do. My only prediction is human behavior will not improve. And so planning is really important, but we have to plan building in that people will misbehave, they will be willfully ignorant, they'll do what they want because they want it when they want it. And so all of our planning has to accommodate the reality of human behavior that we have seen empirically in this country since March. And if we reopen without dealing with the realities of human behavior, we're doing everyone a disservice.
Lisa, how about you? What's your prediction? Do you have any for a year out or even by the end of next year?
I predict that we will be in a hybrid environment with live and virtual being the norm. I also predict that we'll be much more aligned we won't be so siloed. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. And Dr. Stu, you've got the final word. I know that you've been shining your crystal ball all day for this moment. What do you think?
So I think that when you're in the production space, you should be thinking about live productions resuming sometime next summer. I think that rehearsals may be able to start in the springtime, but I don't think we're going to see indoor live audiences until the summer or fall of next year. That would be just based on what I'm seeing and what I'm looking at. Again, lots of things can change that. But I think when I talk to our clients that are in live event space, we talk to them in terms of next summer, next fall as the time frame for indoor events. I'm not talking about outdoor.
Yeah.
Outdoor, I'd love them to do starting tomorrow. We have clients that we're working with that, we do drive-ins with big circles drawn next to the car so they can get out of their car and they can dance and stay within their circle. And there's lots of creative things that are going on right now with some of our clients that will, but indoor events, I think it's the next summer or next fall.
Good to know. Thank you all. Thank you so much for your participation. I am sure that this is going to generate a lot of noise because this is going to remain up on our Facebook page and also on YouTube. And so this has been such a wonderful public service. Thank you so much for joining us here today for Fringe Talk. And thank you to all of you who tuned in for Fringe Talk today. We have one more evening of the KeyBank Rochester Fringe Festival. That's tomorrow night is when we close. No, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. We close on Saturday night. For me, it's all one day. You've got a few more nights. Buy your tickets now at rochesterfringe.com. And we also have over 70 productions that are totally free that you can check out. Free of charge, all listed at rochesterfringe.com. Thank you all for joining us and have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.